for those of you who are following the events in Cairo during the beginning of their Arab Spring, you may remember that Mubarak ordered Vodafone to shut down the internet. And many people in Egypt were actually following the protests in Egypt online. And as a result of them no longer have access because it was shut down, they actually went out into the streets, not in protest so much as to just find out what was going on. And it kind of backfired in a way, putting many more people on the street. And our next speaker was following that particular event and wrote a line in a blog post that still resonates for me personally, and I think resonates very much in this conference's curation, which is that you can shut off the public internet, but you can't shut off the internet public. And so the person who coined that term is our next speaker, Dave Parry, the Associate Professor of Emerging Technology at the University of Texas at Dallas. Please welcome him.
I should correct the record. I'm actually only assistant professor. This is my tenure year. So hopefully next year I can come back and Andrew can introduce me as an associate professor. So I'm here today to convince you of two things. First, that it's not about the internet, or not about the internet in the way that we usually talk about the internet. Rather, it's about the social effects of the internet. And two, that these social effects are so important that they're worth aggressively protecting. Usually, when academics and critics talk about the internet, they frame the question, is the internet good for democracy or bad for democracy? Or, perhaps more subtly, in what ways does the internet strengthen democracy and in what ways does it weaken democracy? I think this is the wrong frame for going about answering this question. The correct frame is to understand how the internet itself changes what it means to be a public. That is, not does the internet strengthen or weaken a democracy, or more subtly, how does the internet strengthen and weaken a democracy? But the more important question of how does the internet affect what it means to be a public and what it means to be a social human being. The central idea here comes from Marshall McLuhan, who coined this famous dictum I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is the medium is the message. Except for this is not actually what McLuhan was arguing. He's actually a victim of his own phrase in this case. He wasn't arguing that content is unimportant. Rather, McLuhan was arguing the far more important subtle point that the medium is the social message. That is, that independent of the content of any medium, the means by which people communicate changes the social relations between people and thus changes the society in which people are using that medium. So he says, in trains, you can focus whether the trains are operating and carrying cornflakes or carrying Cadillacs. But if you focus on the cornflakes or Cadillacs in the trains, you miss the connections of the rail network itself. That is, McLuhan suggests we need to move beyond thinking about the content, the packages inside the network, and think about how the overall network maps a new system of relations. In the same regard, with the internet, we can focus on particular services, whether or not this or that particular service aids in a revolution, whether or not this or that particular service can help a candidate get elected. But to do so is the wrong frame. It's not your father's public. And I mean this in the very way, the father's way. It's not a Jeffersonian republic anymore. It can no longer be, now that we've changed our means of communication and socialization. It will simply no longer work in the same frame. So the more fundamental question that we should be asking is, once we have this social network, once we have a digitally network-enabled public, how does it change the very nature of what we mean by the term democracy? And perhaps more importantly, what does it mean to change the very nature of the human being as a social, civic individual? So, as Andrew was suggesting, the main idea here is it's not about the public internet. It's about the internet public. Once we can shift that frame and understand that it's about the internet public, we can move to the correct mode of analysis. Same way with trains, right? A train public, or a public connected by trains, is much different than a public connected by automobiles, connected by bicycles, or connected by foot. It's very different to live in Dallas, where everybody drives cars. We have a much different social relation to each other than here in New York City, where everybody rides public transportation. In the same way, on the internet, an internet public is significantly different than a television public or a newspaper public. Those prior publics were broadcast publics, and at least for now, the internet public is not a broadcast public. So when you're looking at the internet, you can focus on cute cats with captions or on the news tweets of Andy Carvin, but that's irrelevant. Or not the most relevant thing. The most relevant thing is the connections that form and the new publics that form as a result of those connections. We can think here of just in the minor ways this changes social consciousness, right? So you're walking here to this conference and you see something that's funny. And your first response isn't, oh, I should remember that. That's funny. I know somebody who will appreciate it. Rather, your first response is to take out your phone, to take a picture of it, and just share it with the world. There must be a lot of people out there that would think this is also funny. On the very small level, this changes what it means to be a public. Or on the larger level, as we saw yesterday in the talks of the SOPA protest, or something like what happened with Komen. Right? 10 years ago, Komen probably gets away with what it was doing. But now, because we have the internet public, when Komen changes its policy, people just express their anger. And that mere expression of anger is able to build quickly and fastly for a response. Now, lest you think I'm utopian here, and it's all unicorns and lollipops and rainbows, it's not. Nothing about an internet public necessarily guarantees it's going to move for social justice. Right? The internet public can be just as easily used, perhaps not just as easily, but can be easily used for social ill as social good. Right? Nothing guarantees one response to the other. Networks are not flat. They're not egalitarian. They're not a level playing field. We need to recognize that there's power in the network, and power accrues in the network unequally. But it's a different accrual of power than in broadcast publics. But here's what keeps me lying awake at night. The internet public is much better than the TV public. Right? If you believe that people connected to each other is a good thing, then the internet public is the best form of media public we have had. There isn't even a close second place. But increasingly, different powers and different institutions want to return us to the broadcast model of publics. And we need to work aggressively to protect this public. This is my number one concern as an academic, is that corporations and governments are trying to return us to a broadcast public. So I don't have a time to outline all of the nuances of this argument. But suffice it to say, there are two major players here, governments and corporations, and then the third is the public. And governments, as Chris was indicating, work to return us to a populace that's manipulated from a top-down model, as do corporations, right? In the government sense, you can think here of something like FISA. In the corporation sense, you can think of two things that they do. The first is they want to use the internet as a broadcast medium to return us to broadcast entertainment. I'm on the plane and I whip out my laptop and I go to connect to the internet and it says go in-flight internet. And it says all the power of the internet while you fly. Watch TVs, movies, and shop. I could not think of 3 more boring things to do with the internet than watch TV, movies, and shop. Yet that's what they want. Or perhaps more threateningly is the way that the corporations themselves are now in control of our public discourse. That is, we've farmed out our public sphere to private corporations to which we have an economic relation but no political relation. There's no reason for them to guarantee us our rights. We merely rent the means of expression rather than own them. So I think we need to fight back aggressively. I'm tired of playing defense. We need to play offense. Right? These rights are important and they're worth protecting. They're not playing fair, and neither should we. So I'm going to outline 2 projects here in closing that I think are important, that serve as sort of tips of the icebergs of what we should be doing, that we should expand greatly and think about doing more of. One was mentioned yesterday, which is unseat Lamar, where you're forming a pack to go after Lamar. I think we need lots more of this. Lots more of the internet expressing itself as a public to politicians, spending money, buying our own politicians, punishing the worst actors, and ensuring that our voice is as powerful as the other powerful publics out there. And the second is a project that was built at my institution. It's not mine, but it was done by a group of students and a faculty at my institution, called Enemy Graph. And one of the things we discuss in my institution a lot is, again, that problem of farming out our public discourse to these corporations who then determine, quite literally engineer our social relations by the choices they make. And so Facebook famously only allows you to have positive relations. So we took their marketing graph, social graph, meant to market products and give you positive relations to McDonald's and Walmart, and we said we want to be able to declare enemies. This is the Facebook dislike button. So far, Facebook hasn't shut us down and it's still operating, so that's a good thing. But in general, I want to encourage all of you to do these kinds of things. Build radical projects to push back. It's less about thinking about individual things on the internet in terms of this platform or that platform and how can we tweak the government. It's not about even rebooting the government. It's about totally reformatting what it means to have a democracy, and most importantly, totally reforming what it means to be a civically engaged public. The internet public is young. It's worth protecting. It's just figuring out its power. We shouldn't let others move to co-opt it. So let's aggressively protect it.